and welcome to the Minus One podcast, where we ask the most interesting people in the world about times in their life where they had to answer a question we all eventually struggle with. What's next? Because before you launch at zero, you have to decide what to work on at Minus One. I'm your host, Aditya Agarwal, partner at South Park Commons, joined by my fellow partner, Jonathan Brebner.
Thanks, Aditya. We are joined today by someone who's a little bit different than our usual lineup on the show, former Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy. Kevin was formerly a Republican Congressman representing California's 20th District in the Central Valley near Bakersfield. He served as the House GOP Majority Leader under Speakers Boehner and Ryan, House GOP Minority Leader under Speaker Pelosi, and then finally as Speaker of the House in 2023. Speaker McCarthy, welcome to Minus One.
Thanks for having me.
I'm going to start by jumping right into that last bit of your intro because it's particularly relevant to this Minus One idea. So you were Speaker of the House from January through October of 2023 before you faced a leadership vote led by members of your own caucus, and then the Democratic Party didn't come in to your aid, and you ended up being ousted. And that was the first time that had happened during a legislative session in the history of the House. So Minus One is this idea that it's the point where you figure out what you want to do next. And typically that happens after you have decided that you're ready to discover what that is. But also sometimes that happens before you are actually ready for it and not necessarily in your own timing. So first, I wanted to give you kind of a short and sweet opportunity to say, why are you not Speaker of the House right now?
Well, I mean, I kind of explained this before. I'm not Speaker of the House, and it could go a lot of, but there's one guy in the House, a guy named Matt Gaetz, that has an ethics problem because he slept with a 17-year-old and paid her, that he tried to leverage me to stop the ethics investigation. I wouldn't do it, so I'm no longer Speaker. So 7 other people joined him. All the Democrats joined him, but I think they joined for political reasons. When you say Minus One, this isn't the first time I had a battle for Speaker. I could have been Speaker after Boehner. I was Majority Leader then, and I was about to step into it, and I stumbled in an interview with Hannity, and it disrupted. And there's turmoil in both parties, and we don't just have 2 parties anymore. We have like 3 or 4 parties within each party. And it's been growing. And I had to, that was the question then. What do I do then? I could have left. I could have been done. No, I stayed with it. We went into the minority, and I had to win the majority again. But then when we won the majority, you didn't even talk about that. I had to go 15 rounds to get elected Speaker. No one's done that since the Civil War. So, I mean, if there's different books out there that I look to, I love Angela Duckworth's Grit. It's perseverance in whatever you do in life. I give as good as I get. So, I understand what the rules are. I wouldn't do anything different. I voted to keep government open, which I thought's the right way to do it and still pay our troops. And I'd do the same thing over again.
Speaker Kevin, I'd say that your grit and your resilience is definitely something I've looked up to. So here's a question. So, at the end of, you get ousted. It's a little ugly, kind of like what goes down. Why do you decide to, I would say, leave Congress? Is it just something that you had been thinking about figuring out what to do next? Or were you like, hey, it's easier to tackle your next chapter with a cleaner slate? Talk to us about that.
It's a great question. And I spent some time thinking about it. And there's a couple different things. So after the motion to vacate, I didn't want to put us back through it because I thought it would slow Congress down. And then, so my next question is, do I stay in Congress? I'd served 17 years. And so there were some issues I thought what was best for the party, best for my district, and best for me personally. So I didn't make a rash decision. I stayed another 4 months. But what I went through, these are the things I thought about. When we finally, it took us a while to select a new speaker. And 3 or 4 went up that could have done the job, and they got knocked out. So we were in real turmoil. And so when we elected Johnson, I told him, look, I'm not going to go to conference to help you because you got to be the leader. People have to look to you unless you need me to. And when I went to a couple conferences at the end, when I would get up and speak, the whole conference would shift and go to what I wanted to do. And I felt as though I'd be undermining. It's got to be like in business. You're the CEO and you bring somebody else in your cabinet. You're still running the ship. I was 58 years old. And on a personal note, my father died at 58. So I thought, how many years do I have in life? I've been putting all this in. Maybe I should depart. I also thought I've been fortunate being elected. If I'm not going to run next time, but I left a little early, it would let the person fill my seat, could fill it early and have a leg up on the next one. So I thought I could help the district because I didn't think much would happen when I departed. And the timing why was January. California had their primaries earlier. So I would have to leave January 1st instead of staying later throughout the year. Otherwise, the seat would never get filled. So timing was that part. And so I also thought if I wanted to stay in politics, it wouldn't be in Congress. If I wanted to still public serve, it'd probably be in the administration. So I also thought on the outside, if I went outside for a little while, and then if I wanted to come back, that would be, I'd be in a stronger position. Personally, I'd be in a stronger position to be able to serve if I wanted to, if there was opportunity. And if not, I'd been elected for more than 20 years, and I never thought that would be my last career. I think you're defined more in life by other things. So my father's dying weighed on me. My mother ended up dying in March, so it was a great time to be away. I started taking her on different trips with me. So it was kind of, from a management point of view inside Congress, if I stayed there, it would still disrupt the conference. They're going to have to heal these things that never happened before. And if you see, since I left, there's still internal battles. Things aren't moving, and they're going to have to fix them instead of me being in the middle fixing them for them to be stronger. That's the way I looked at it.
What is most likely to be next? It sounds like you're still kind of working through that would be. We'll talk a little bit about, you mentioned possibly joining the administration, the second Trump administration. So we'll talk about that in a bit. But what are did you immediately have a sense for the sorts of things that you were interested in possibly doing next? Did you have a process for working through those things in addition to the process you just described in the decision to leave Congress?
Well, my
starting to narrow down.
My college, before I was elected to Congress, I would consider myself, not in your terms, but in my terms, an entrepreneur in a small scale, all right? And my degree's in business, a BA in marketing, and an MBA. So I like that, and I always dreamt when I departed, I normally wanted to go to business, and what did I want to do there? But I also felt it's still a responsibility to serve your government, even if you're not in administration or something else. And there was a number of topics that I worked on. And I have this philosophy. I love history. And I truly believe the world is in 1938, right? There's an interesting article. Have you ever read Graham Allison's book, Destined for War? Do you know who Graham Allison is by chance? Okay. So Graham and Kissinger, before Kissinger died, wrote this interesting article. It starts with 79, 79, and 9. It's been 79 years since we've had a great war. It's been 79 years since a nuclear atomic weapon has been used. And there's 9 countries with the capability of using them. What's interesting is we recently had these Soviet subs down in Cuba. The last time we had like a Cuba missile crisis, most people projected there'd be 25 to 35 countries with it right now. Those things don't just happen. And if you look at the world with this combination of China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran, it looks, and if you look at Putin's actions, very similar to Hitler. So I want to continue in that space. I firmly believe there are macro problems and micro problems in America. The macro to me have always been our debt, the challenge of China and these 4, our education system, and none of those things could be solved on its own, right? So I was trying to change the structure of the House. I created the Select Committee on China, very bipartisan, and we could get in there how it created. So part of me wants to continue on working on the issues I care about. I believe whichever country in an odd way says who captures AI or quantum has an advantage. And I think about it in, if I look at worldwide, I think China will work hard at it, but will never allow it to be too private or public because they're afraid to capture government. Europe will overregulate, and I think America will be the Wild West and have the best opportunity. But I'm fearful, what does Congress do in it? So try to, MIT has a course to teach AI and quantum to all the generals in our military. So about 3-4 years ago, I took like 10 members to MIT and I had them develop a course for Congress. So none of these things you can solve with one party. You got to do them together like that. So I've been trying to do that. I want to continue that. I don't have to be elected or in the administration. I can harness the power of what I've done by bringing people together and continue to move forward there. I love capitalism. I think it's a great form to spur economics, not just for a few people to get wealthy, but an entire society. So there, I want to work. I go around to a lot of colleges. I want to inspire people. My family, we're all Democrats. I happen to be a Republican. You could be in any party. But I think people should engage in the political system. It's healthier when they do. I got turned down for an internship to go to Congress. I became a congressperson. Public policy is important. So I try to spur more people involvement that I can. And at the end of the day, I want to be able to make some money to leave to my children at the same time too. Be productive.
Those are amazing goals. Maybe to come back to your time, kind of your last stint in Congress. One of the things I often wonder about, Speaker, is that in Silicon Valley, we wear failure. You start a company, it fails. We wear it as a badge of honor and kind of like, hey, yeah, did you give it a shot? Did you give it a good shot? Did you try hard? And in some ways, failure is definitely celebrated in Silicon Valley. One of the things I often wonder about is that in politics, every politician in some ways has to go through a failure. They lose a race, their coalition doesn't kind of get to the majority. But it feels very public. It feels like a very public, in some ways, judgment on you and kind of like your values. So what would you say that, kind of the political failures what can entrepreneurs learn from that in a way that maybe we in Silicon Valley don't fully appreciate?
The first thing you have to learn is you never fail. Okay. Your mindset should be you never fail. And politics is similar to everything else. I never lost a race. I've either won or I learned. The idea that you lost, all it means is the clock ran out. So when I came to Congress was 2006 and Republicans lost the majority. And I created something called the Young Guns. And I came in the smallest Republican class they had since, 1913. And how did we go from there and win the majority? I would go out and recruit. And there's a number of people in politics that didn't win the first time around. And I'd call them up. I said, did you lose? And they said, yeah. I said, no, you didn't. The clock ran out. It's just like in the sports. You might lose that weekend, but you could still make it to the Super Bowl. It's your mindset. And it's the same thing in business. I opened a couple businesses. You learn more from your struggles than you ever do from something being easy. And it's more people who have a mindset. If those who think they've lost, they're never going to make it in life. If someone sits back and says, oh, you lost, you were the first person removed as speaker. Really? How many have ever been speaker? I had to win the majority to be speaker. And when we won the majority, you know what the rest of the Republican Party did? They all lost. The presidency, 2 cycles of the Senate, they lost governors, they lost it. But we won the House. And you know who we won? We elected the most women, the most minorities we've had. How do you do that? The quality of the candidate matters. And you're really willing to engage. I mean, if you're afraid of risk, don't enter the field. You're right about politics. The only thing that equates politics is probably a professional sports. Why? Because we're on a stage where everybody's watching and there's a scoreboard. So if you're going to quit after one game or you're going to quit after one season, you really weren't weathered for the game itself.
You're mentioning kind of ways to modify the personal conduct of the leaders who serve in Congress as a way of affecting the institution and affecting the ability of those members to work together and deliver results. But then you also mentioned, I think, a point that's very important and that most people don't give enough credence to, which is that politicians are bound and constrained by their voters, right?
Yes.
They're constrained by their voters in the primary. They're constrained by the general electorate. They're constrained by the kind of increasingly balkanized media ecosystems that are sort of extensions of the various factions within their partisan group. And so I guess my question is, if those constraints are still there, how is it that you can affect institutional change on the institutional side? Like, if you could make any changes within the realm of like reasonable possibilities, so not a constitutional amendment, are there things that could actually change in Congress, in the House of Representatives in particular, that would either address the way that those constraints produce outcomes that voters say they don't actually want, but then in effect create or...
Look, structure dictates behavior. You either adapt to the structure or you leave. So the first thing I would do is make a personal one. I'd no longer allow one person to be able to call a motion to vacate, because otherwise,
right, that was a particular change that led to some instability in Congress.
I would tell you this: you're not going to be able to solve the debt or capture big problems if we continue to look at a 10-year window. Okay. We score bills on what they cost, but we only look at a 10-year window. So what Einstein said, there's only one miracle in this world, the time value of money, the compound of interest. Well, the same thing happens in the compound of debt. So if you change a mechanism to some program, the first 10 years gives you a problem. But if you look, because you made this change in the 10-year, the 20, 40 years, you sustain the program in a better place. So why aren't we looking in 50-year windows and scoring different items that we take up? Much better way to capture the debt.
Do you think that the constraints of politics would allow you to do that? Presumably that's a reference to, like
it's totally
sustainability of Social Security and Medicare and,
Yeah, I mean, the way I would deal with Social Security, look, Social Security hasn't been dealt with since Reagan and Tip O'Neill. And it was the sheer power of those two men to weigh. Now, in today's world, politics is different, right? You get your information faster by social media. There's nobody editing it, whether it's real or not. And you get rewarded in different ways, right? People raise more money because if they vote no and yell in the Republican Party, right? You fight your leadership, I get more attention. So people will behave that way to try to raise money or something else. Well, you can't have one party solve these problems. It's an American problem. So you got to have the willpower that both would sit down. But the minute you go into a committee and you start taking the bill up, influences from outside will come in, and then it'll put the pressure on a member and the break. So, in 1990, it was an amazing year before 89, right? The Soviet Union collapses. We got Tiananmen Square and everything else. And we now find in America, we have a military structure designed to compete against the Soviet Union that's no longer there, that we need to restructure it. But how do you go to elected official and say, you know what? It's probably not best if we keep that base in your district of overall America, make you say something. Well, no one's going to make that vote because they're going to get in trouble, right? So we created something called BRAC, the Base Realignment and Closure. And what you do is you take the leaders from all parties, get to a point to a commission, right? And the president does too. The only thing you do is you set a criteria, and it's not just 50% have to pass it out. You make whatever vote margin higher. If you come to a conclusion, you're guaranteed a vote on the floor, no amendments, okay? So you can't nickel it around. You're just going to put it on the floor and you're going to vote it. And what happens in that case, 9 times out of 10, it's very bipartisan. So how do we create a structure of a very difficult issue to try to take the politics out of it so we'll look further? But we live in different times, okay? So right now we're living in the Republican world and also in the Democratic world on the more liberal, of populism, okay? And populism, what's the principle behind populism? Well, there's really not one. It's appeasing, it's making somebody happy. It's what I feel, right? And what we really should do as policymakers is, if we're by the people, for the people, of the people, but are you going to let the people all pick all the time, even though they're not sitting in committee? Or are you going to be the leader and explain it to them? So what you really do is you want to have leaders that look 50 years out instead of, I'm going to run for the Senate, or I'm going to run for the president, so I'm going to forgive all your loans that you said you'd pay back. Does that make you feel good? Could I get your vote today? But what does it do for tomorrow? So you're always going to have this problem, but right now we're walking through this populism, which I'm fearful could create a real problem for America.
I guess to your point about populism and sort of the inverse of elected officials being constrained by their voters, there is also clearly the effect of leaders leading their voters into particular positions.
I could have stayed in Congress for 30 years, voted against everything, never rose up in leadership. And would you think I was a more successful congressman, or become speaker and stand up and maybe have to take the loss, or maybe sit there 15 rounds to win something? I mean, it's going to take different people who, it's just like in business. You find entrepreneurs that put the whole business on the line and either hit it or they don't. But had they never put it on the line, they never would have made it. But what we need to start teaching Americans, and not just in Congress, that you respect the other person's opinion. You don't demonize them because they think differently. They may view success to be something else, but that's maybe what they grew up in. That's maybe what they understand. But you have to debate. And the problem we're having in this country today is we shift our opinion based upon what state we're in. We shift our opinion whether we support a vaccine based upon who's president at the time. We shift our opinion based upon who delivers it. You know, I can sit here and I can walk out and I can say all these different opinions, but if I say it came from Trump, a Democrat will say they're opposed to it. If I say it came from Biden, Republicans say opposed to it, but it may be the exact same thing that Trump said. I think as a society, we've got a problem that we need to deal with ourselves, and don't think that Congress is going to solve it for us.
I'm curious, because a lot of what we do at South Park Commons is to give people a space to really, I would say, navigate that period of uncertainty after their last big failure or success, right?
Mm-hmm. Your last learning experience.
Your last learning experience. I love that. So, some of the things I think about is like, talk me through what that first week looked like. You go through this intense experience in the House, you kind of, go through your decision-making process. You're like, hey, you know what? For a number of reasons, both for yourself and for the party, I'm actually going to, go ahead and pursue something else. Did that first week feel like completely unmoored? Did you have completely loss of structure in terms of, I'm sure your days were incredibly structured, right? In terms of meetings and so on. So how do you navigate that? How do you navigate kind of both the emotional, but also kind of the psychological kind of ups and downs of just having a completely new setup?
Well, everybody's wired differently, right? I watch people elected that the one thing I learned when you're elected, you're always going to go through the barrel, right? If you just want to be liked, don't run for office, right? If kind of like in sports, tell me any other occupation on a given day, you get to know how many people like you and how many people dislike you, down to the number, right?
Like an entire polling operation that exists to tell you that.
Yeah, but on election day, you literally get to know the number. So it doesn't matter what the polls say. You say, oh, I got high favorability. Well, maybe I don't. And being elected, anytime someone gets in trouble, even if you're in the other party, even if I don't care for you in some manner, I want to be your first phone call. And I don't want to talk about what stumbled. I just want you to know things will be okay. I remember watching this one thing. I think Tom Hanks said it. He said he wished someone had told him when he was down and out, like failing, someone told him, this too shall pass. this too shall pass. He goes, I learned that. But I wish somebody told me that when I thought everything was going right. This too shall pass, right? So you're going to have these moments in life. And so I'm always the optimist. So I wasn't sad the week I left. Now, my life was always booked. There's certain things I want to achieve. I'm just going to achieve them by doing in a different manner. And I never thought Congress defines my life. Just like you started in a different business before, you started in others. I think the real struggle would have been not when I left Speaker, after the first election winning the majority and getting to be Speaker. It was a lot more pressure sitting there 15 rounds when no one's done it before, because the thing you don't think about is no one's done that in modern history with TV watching. And when you have an elected Speaker, there are no rules. So then I have no power. I can't control coming on and off the floor. The world's watching. I remember after winning Speaker, and I went over to Israel to speak at the 75th anniversary at the Knesset. And then I went to Jordan, and I went to Egypt, and then I went to Italy. But I remember going in to see President Assisi. You know the first thing he said to me? I watched all 15 rounds. You know what happens in America? People watch. But what I hoped people saw was I wasn't going to give up.
It's like if you're running a major company, it's like you're having all your board meetings be televised and all your employees kind of like chiming in about your performance, right? Like in real time, which is, it's crazy.
You have to take the personal feelings out of it.
Yeah.
And people can it's better advice to give than to receive it, but you never learn how to do it until you go through it. I had to go through the barrel a couple times until I'm literally, I don't care what you say about me. I know who I am. Your comments don't matter. And remember this too. The victor writes the history. Think about Winston Churchill. How many times did he get thrown out? And then after he wins, then after he serves and saves World War II, they throw him out then. It's a weird occupation.
Well, in his case, he also literally was writing history a lot of the time. So
yes.
that helped.
Maybe to bring it back to the -1 concept, there are going to be a number of, I would say, Congress members who kind of have a learning experience this coming election.
Yeah.
What is the one biggest piece of advice you'd give them as they kind of like, go down the barrel, learn something, and then they kind of have to figure out like, what's their -1 journey over the next, call it like 12, 24 months. Like you've had, you've obviously told us a lot about your own journey, but what is one piece of advice you'd give them?
Well, I've watched people run and not win. Now they're much more successful in the private sector than the person who won and went forward, right? And it's a certain attribute. And the very best person doesn't win all the time, right? That's not the attribute. It doesn't say who's the very best automatically gets a win. Just the idea that you were willing to run, you gain skills from it, right? And I think you could apply those skills in other occupations. The first thing I would tell you is just because you didn't get elected to an elected position doesn't mean you can't be a part of helping the country. And if you go away and stay away, that's a bad example, right? I tell people before they run, this is the first question I always ask them. I never talk, and I've been the recruiter for a long time. I never ask somebody to run or try to talk to you. I ask you this one question. Why do you want to run? Simon Sinek has a good book. Did you ever read it? It starts with why.
Yes, that's a good book.
So it's great. People don't buy what you do. They buy why do you do it. He has a great TED talk. He does it. Martin Luther King, the Wright brothers, and Apple. Right? It's only like 20 minutes. You should watch it. It's by why do you do something, right? It's a different concept. And there's a lot of great people on paper, but why do they not win? Why do they fizzle out as a candidate? They never had the fire in the belly. And there's some people you think would be awful, and oh my God, they do so well because they're genuine. They know where they're going, And there's certain people in both parties that you can identify as that, and you may disagree with everything they stand for, right? But Bernie Sanders, he's a true socialist. I mean, he's registered as socialist. The thing that people respect about him is, his why. He doesn't deviate it to be elected or different. This is what he truly believes. I respect that. But there's other people who just flip all the time. And that's where a principle is better in the basis. And so,
yeah, I really like that, Speaker, because I think that I feel as though another way of phrasing what something like South Park Commons helps people achieve is to, in some ways, recalibrate for like, what is your why, right? Like, because sometimes in the fog of war, you can kind of forget that. So like, when you take a step back and you kind of go back to that question of like, what is my bigger why? Why am I doing this? Like, what does actual success look like? What are my actual goals? And I think something like STC is really designed to be able to help answer those questions.
Let's give an answer. So a person runs and they tell you their why, because I wanted to achieve this. Well, they don't win and they don't get a. Well, does that mean you still can't achieve that? Martin Luther King was never elected to anything, but he had unbelievable ability and changed America. He knew his why. So lots of times people can know their why, but that may not be the right avenue to achieve what they're trying to achieve. So before you do anything in life, knowing your why or where you want to go is a much better place. And this may not be the best place to achieve that.
And if you had to drop everything that you are currently working on, so every kind of like current endeavor that you're doing, presumably that would mean politics entirely, and go and do something completely different, what do you think it would be?
What do I think it would be differently?
Completely new avenue of
start an AI company. Started in AI.
I think doing something in AI, for this reason, right? There are certain things that transform the Industrial Revolution. Internet. When internet came about, the world didn't know what it was. Based in Silicon Valley and others, the wealth of America was people who created things, right? Manufactured something. And government didn't figure out. Then once Microsoft, everything takes off, then government now says, they need to regulate. Well, the world's different. Still going to come from Silicon Valley. The wealth comes from different people. But government knows now how AI can change your life. And tell me in the essence of someone that's been in government, someone's been in business, if we don't get that right, if we become Europe and overregulate it, we'll miss out on it, right? So this is not something that you want one side to win, some trying to lose. Or you could be 5 AI companies that think they're ahead of everybody else, and let me capture government to put regulations on so nobody can ever compete against me. So long term we'll fail because you'll fail on the competition end, right? So how do you protect society without stopping the growth while at the same time be able to grow, but also maybe you need to adapt different legislation along the way? And I think if I look at a skill set I have, that's probably a skill set not a lot of people have right now.
Well, Speaker Kevin, I'd say that this was a fascinating conversation. Thank you for telling us about your journey. I think it's inspiring. I think it's inspiring to kind of really hear your frame of like, you never actually lose a race. You just kind of like live on to fight another day and you learn from it. And these are exactly the principles that we have tried to apply at South Park Commons and in Silicon Valley more broadly. I, for one, am very excited to see what you do next in the coming months. I think it's going to be a very exciting time, tumultuous, but exciting time for our country. And I do hope that the country can call on your services to kind of like take us forward. So thank you for the time today. It was an honor and a pleasure. Thank you again.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you.
Thanks.